Okay, so hi everyone, and welcome to the second AOS Student Affairs Committee monthly series event for this fall semester. The whole Student Affairs Committee is really excited to have such great attendance for this event. So the event today, as you all know, because you signed up, is all about writing stellar grant proposals. And the idea for this event is tied closely to the fact that the AOS research grant deadline for Student Research Awards is coming up in January. And we thought this would be a really great way to do some skill sharing and strategy sharing for how to put together the strongest proposals for these small research grants. So we have a really exciting program for you today. First, we're going to hear from Brian Peer, who is the chair of the AOS Research Awards Committee. And then after that, we have 8 volunteers who were recipients of AOS Student Research Awards just this year in 2021, who are going to be able to lend some of their perspective about that writing process also. So Brian, thank you so much for being here on behalf of the Research Awards Committee. We're grateful to have your behind the scenes perspective for us. And you can take it away if you want to share your screen. Jenny, can you make sure Brian has permission to do that? I think you should be good to go.
Okay. All right, there we go. Okay, all right. Well, hello, everyone. I am Brian Peer, chair of the Research Awards Committee, and I've given this talk in various formats several times now. I'd like to have it during the annual meeting, kind of get to know the Research Awards Committee. I know when you're a student and even a postdoc, it can be intimidating. You don't know who these people are that are evaluating your applications. And so we just like to get to know you guys and kind of explain the process. So I will be doing that for the committee today. I'm just going to give you kind of a brief overview of what we do, how things have changed here recently, some tips on how to succeed, although these awards are very competitive. And then I'll open it up for questions. I want to make sure that we have plenty of time for you guys to ask me some questions. So this is the committee. These are my fellow reviewers. And last year there was a major change in the composition of the committee. So you can see here, these are the dates when we joined this committee. So we've got 5 people that have been on this committee for a very long period of time. And the reason for that, and these people are awesome. These people have done so much work for the AOU and now the AOS in reviewing these proposals. Our workload has probably been the highest of any committee, and you'll see why that is in just a minute. And I value these folks, they're friends, mentors, because they have stayed on the committee, because in the past it's been very difficult to get people to join because of the workload. So what we did, and then you can see some other individuals here that have been on a little bit longer. Last year, we added all these folks. So this was kind of one of my major moves to decrease the workload. And everybody did a great job. So the other thing to keep in mind, what we try to do is maximize diversity on this committee. Not only the diversity you think of nowadays, but also the diversity in terms of their research expertise, because we know, our area. My area is behavioral ecology, avian breed parasitism, so I know that best. So I'm not going to be as well versed in ecology or conservation issues like Scott Robinson, so on and so forth. So I really work hard to make sure that we are diverse, and I also try to make sure that your proposals are viewed by as many people as possible to get evaluated in a fair manner. So we're up to 30 people now. This gives you an idea of what we've had in terms of applications. And so these are the data that I have. So I joined in 2003, I think, so almost 20 years ago. And you can see our numbers. We've had this increase recently. We're expecting a lot more in 2021 because we were offering COVID relief money that didn't materialize probably for a variety of different reasons. I think some people's research was still postponed, but I think other people just came up with alternatives so they could graduate. So they had to work out things with their advisors. So most we had was a year or so ago, almost 200. Now we're kind of back at 170, 175. So that's pretty typical for the committee. Always looking for more applicants. So we like to spread the word around because this is, and from the perspective of the AOS, this is one of our best ways, most effective ways of supporting students and postdocs. We want to keep you guys around. We want you guys to succeed. We want you to become future members. So we try our best to get these grants out to as many people as possible. There. So how do we do it? So a little bit of background again to, kind of create some transparency here for you guys, so it's not as much of a mystery. We now have just a single round of review. So prior to a couple years ago, we would have 2 rounds of review. Each proposal would be evaluated by 3 people. So again, when you see that list of people and you think, oh, this person was evaluating my proposal, and that person, no, in reality, just a few select individuals. And so prior to about 2019, I would see the vast majority of the proposals now because we've changed this format. I don't see, well, I don't read all of them. I just don't have time to go over 175 or 200 proposals. It's the same thing for other members of the committee. So we have this single round of review, takes about, well, let's see, end of January, try to get things done by April. So 2 or 3 months. And now it's evaluated by 5 reviewers. Again, that's my idea, to maximize the number of eyes that can evaluate your proposal, because not everybody shares the same expertise. In the past, we had 2 rounds. And the way that worked, everybody evaluated, well, each proposal was evaluated by 3 people, and then the top, I think it was 50 proposals, was evaluated by everybody in the committee. That became untenable just due to the increased number of proposals. Plus, I also wanted to maximize the number of reviews that each one got. So if you didn't make it past the first round, your proposal was only looked at by 3 people. And this is the way it was since I had joined the committee. So these are, I think, good for proposals, but also for the workload of the folks on the committee. So up until the past couple of years, each individual on this committee was evaluating 75 to 80 proposals a year. Again, I would argue that our committee does probably more work than any of the other committees, not to, make the other committees look bad or anything like that, or to criticize them, but we have done a lot of work over the years. This year, though, things changed when we added the new members, and it was down to 32 proposals per year. So even that can be kind of a steep workload. So, but the committee was very positive. I think this is also beneficial for you guys because we're not bombarded trying to get through 75 or 80 in a 3-month period. Now it's just 30. So that helped everybody. This is really good news right here. The number of individuals that we funded last year, we funded more people than ever, 76 people in total, 70 students, 6 postdocs. And the reason for that is that we funded an additional 30 people due to COVID relief. So again, your AOS, your professional society, stepped up, and we decided that the best way to help people during the pandemic was to focus on research and get money to you guys to help you to do your research. So additional 30 people got that funding. So if you look at that, that's a 45% funding rate. There's not many, competitions, research grant competitions, where that you get that sort of success. If you remove the COVID funding that we had this year, you're still looking at 1 in every 4 applications being funded, and that's pretty darn good as well. Our budget, just over $100,000. I'm not sure what the budget will be for this year. I'll find out here in the next few weeks. But this is another kind of positive step, because this is almost a 40% increase since I became the chair of the committee in 2013. That's the one thing you need to know about the committee. We want to fund more proposals, but we're limited in terms of the amounts based on whatever's in the budget for the AOS. But the AOS and council, the presidents, have been very helpful in realizing that we want you guys to succeed. So we've seen that kind of steady increase in the budget to help you guys out. So what's new? We separated the postdocs from the students. When I joined the committee, there wasn't even an opportunity for the postdocs. And I think that's probably at least the last 5 years, probably closer to 7 or 8, where we added the postdocs to the competition. Actually, now that I think of it, probably closer to 10. Time flies by. So then we split postdocs from the students because postdocs have a huge advantage over you students, even if you're a PhD. So we split that apart. They have their own separate budget. It helps both groups. We fund more postdocs, and then students are not, that's it's an unfair advantage for the postdocs over the students. So some of the things that we're looking at in the future, this is a question that always comes up, and I think we can probably achieve this here, if not this year, maybe the next year, is ways to give you guys feedback on your proposal. You can imagine if each one of us is evaluating 70 to 80 proposals, making comments on every single one, and then getting those comments to 200 applicants is going to be very challenging. So with reduced workload, we're hoping to give you at least, maybe a paragraph summary of why you weren't funded, or maybe some issues that we saw with it. IACUC, this every once in a while this comes up. We all have to have IACUCs to do our research, whether you're collecting species or just doing simple behavioral observations. So we're going to try to make that more streamlined on the page where you go to submit all your documents, but still you need to give some clear explanation that yes, I've initiated those procedures. There's some new awards, and one that will go into effect this year is the Penny Ficken Award. And I've got a slide here to show you this. We have a series of named awards from our generous donors, and you'll see this on the website when you go to the Research Awards page. You don't really need to worry about this, because what I do at the very end, once we decide which proposals were the ones that we're going to fund, I decide where these are going to go. So you can see blights, the Carnes. So the Carnes is one where there's a specific requirement, and this award goes specifically to women who are non-smokers. Again, if you are a smoker, or if you're not a woman, whatever, it's not going to be held against you. If you're in that top group, I'll just give you a different award. But the Carnes, when they created that award, that was a very specific series of stipulations that they had for that. And again, when you go to the website, you'll indicate, are you eligible for Carnes? The other one that you have to, where is it at here? Yeah, have some specific requirements or meet some level of requirements is the Grinnell Research Award. So in this case, you are in the first or second year of your PhD program. So that's going to effectively eliminate any master's students or undergraduates. But again, it was based on the stipulations and the criteria for that. And so you can see all the other ones, and some of them have more specific requirements or what they want to focus on. Some are more on tropical biology, others are kind of wide open. But again, this is not something you need to worry about. It's just kind of in recognition of these individuals and leaving money behind to support your research. So what can you do to be successful? Just really some generalities here that I'll provide today. I think first and foremost is just simply follow the directions. Because if you don't, this is one of the things that we'll look at a proposal, and if you decided that you were not going to double space your proposal, you were going to single space it, well, that will get you an automatic rejection without review, because you have effectively have double the space now to explain your proposal, whereas everybody else that followed the directions, they don't have the same amount of space to explain and expand on what they want to do. So that's it's not fair to everybody else. Plus, it's going to stand out, because if we're sitting there reviewing 30 proposals, they're all double spaced, and here comes one that's single spaced, you're going to get nailed and you're going to be eliminated. Follow the page limits. Usually everybody's pretty good about that. There's an 8-page limit, and then if you go to our directions, it tells you exactly what we want in terms of the proposal, literature cited, the CV, and then the double spacing. Also, there's sections where you don't have to double space. So for example, your CV doesn't need to be double spaced. It has to be a PDF with the correct title, and this might seem kind of ridiculous on your part, but when we're going through a couple hundred different applications, it really is helpful if they're all named in the same manner. Um, it helps us to organize those and then compile and disseminate those amongst everybody in the committee. So you want to make sure of that. And use the suggested heading. So every once in a while, somebody will decide that they don't need to follow, again, our directions and use their own headings, and that those proposals aren't going to fare well. So, but for the most part, people do follow these instructions, and that's, the simplest thing that you can do. If not, it's our easiest way to get rid of you and have one less proposal to have to review. Some other things, a thorough literature survey. So you see the individuals on the committee, broad range of research interests, and you want to do a good job because some of those people might be an expert in your area. Little things matter. So if your proposal is filled with typos, punctuation errors, you didn't bother to use scientific names, well, that might, suggest to a reviewer that, well, they don't care about, putting together a proposal without typos or correct punctuation, then what sort of science are they going to do? You're going to be evaluated in that way, and you're going to stand out compared to all the other people that don't do that. In terms of the budget, you don't want to pad it. You want to provide specific information. We're pretty generous in terms of what if you ask for $2,500 and you have a good proposal, your chances are you're going to get $2,500. So don't, make it more than that it needs to be, because we'll sit there and look through it, and that's one of the criteria we'll examine it on, is the appropriateness of your budget. So in some other cases, if you have a big grant, if you have an NSF grant through your advisor that's paying a lot of stuff, then that's usually not going to be something that we're going to eliminate you by, but you need to clearly explain to us, have that budget and say, have kind of columns on a table and say, this is the things that I need money from. This is where I'm asking it from, the different resources. And we also talk about on the website that it's okay if you ask for the same item from multiple agencies, because, it's competitive out there. The only thing you have to do is, if you get the grant from multiple agencies, then you need to decide which one you're going to take the money from, and then notify us or the other granting agency as soon as possible that you won't be taking it, because that way we can give those monies to somebody else. I mentioned the IACUC. So for collecting birds, we're an ornithological organization. I think probably most of the people on the committee are collecting something at some point in their career. I have to, I collect every year. So we just want to make sure that you justify this and have it okayed with your IACUC. We have nothing against collecting whatsoever, but if you're going to collect a large number of individuals, you need to be careful and carefully justify that, because every once in a while, an item like that might come up and one of the reviewers say, hey, this concerns me. So then as a committee, the entire committee usually will take a look at that and kind of decide amongst ourselves. When you think about it and think about the people who are on that committee, we have a lot more expertise collectively than your local IACUC. So your local IACUC, at the university has got a variety of different people. They don't all have experience with birds like we do. So in some cases, we just want a little bit more detail. You should always have your advisor review the proposal. I think that's whether you're a master's or a PhD student. And I think oftentimes you can tell as a reviewer if the advisor doesn't review it. You guys aren't experts at this, and you need help, and there's nothing wrong with getting that help from your advisor. Hopefully they're willing to do that for you. So what else do you need to do to be successful? You need to have a hypothesis-driven research proposal, okay? And the more novel it is, the better off it is. I mentioned the fact that we're increasing the number of awards available, but it's still very competitive. We're not the local Audubon grant program, okay? Most of us have a local Audubon, and they'll give, a few $100s here, maybe $1,000 there. So in those, you can do pretty much anything. You can say, hey, I want to save the birds in my local sanctuary or my local park here. That's great. We're all ornithologists. We want to save the birds as well, but you're going to go up against these novel hypothesis-driven projects. And when it comes to us ranking and evaluating them, these are probably going to receive higher ranks than these that are, kind of a local interest. And again, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with those, but just keep in mind what you're going up against. Many of these proposals that we fund are ending up in, journals with high impact factors. So it's very competitive. This is an important one. Don't wait until the last minute. And I'm as guilty as the next person when it comes to procrastinating. Oh yes, that's due such and such a date. I have time. But over the years, I've kind of monitored when the applications come in. And I think, well over 50% are coming in the last week, and usually the last 24 hours, we get the bulk of the applications, and it's fine. If you've spent the entire time prior to that kind of honing, editing it, talking to your advisor, making sure it looks good. But the problem arises that you submitted at the last minute and whoops, I forgot to include a section, or I gave you an older version, or I submitted one with my advisor's comments still there on the proposal from track changes. That has happened. It's embarrassing. So don't wait till the last minute, and please don't contact us either. Oh, hey, my internet was broken. And it's kind of the same thing, when you're a TA, and certainly when you're a professor and you get these excuses why somebody couldn't get their work in on time. I've heard the same sort of excuses, but I'm going to give you the same answer that I give everybody. We can't do it because our portal will open for applications December 1st, and it's going to close at the end of January. You have 2 months. So we think that's plenty of time to get it in. So just avoid all these kind of last minute situations and submit them sooner rather than later. Plus, occasionally, and I don't think it's as much of an issue in the past, but you have to have your AOS membership. You have to be logged into the portal, and you never know what could happen that last hour before they are due. All sorts of things could go wrong. Your internet might legitimately be out that day. You never know. So it's always good to get it in time. Finally, if you don't succeed, so if you do all those things and you write this great proposal, you're doing great science, but you don't get funded, don't get down about it. We all get rejected. This is part of the game that we play, so to speak. If you're going to be a successful scientist, and you have to get used to rejection. And if it's the first year of your master's, apply for the second year. If it's early part of your PhD, apply again. There's plenty of proposals, and maybe some of you folks here on the call today have done this, where you've been rejected and you get it the second time around. It also helps that second time around if you have data. You have this hypothesis, and now you have data to say, hey, look, I have data to support this. Then it's probably going to increase your chances of being successful. And I think that's all I'm going to say. So if you guys have questions for me, happy to answer them.
Great. Thank you so much, Brian, for that presentation. That was really helpful. I think as a former applicant for some of these grants, I think going into the detail as to what's required to make a grant successful is really helpful to know. And like Brian said, let's open the floor up to questions. And yeah.
What's the best way for folks to ask questions? Would you like people to put them in the chat or raise their hands?
Yeah, go ahead and raise your hand, and I can probably just, call you out. And yeah, you can just ask Brian your questions. Okay, there, Austin's raised his hand. Go ahead, Austin.
Yeah, hey, my name's Austin. I'm in Idaho, master's student at Idaho State. And I was curious, you mentioned the budget increase for these awesome scholarships. Was there like a big increase in like AOS membership, or just the allocation of funds, or prioritization of stuff within AOS? It's just kind of a curiosity question.
It's more about allocation of funds and realizing the importance of this for your success. The COVID relief, though, that we talked about it, and I think there were some solicitations to students and postdocs and even assistant professors. How can we help you as a result of the pandemic? And it was overwhelming. Funnel the money into research to help us to kind of make up for that lost time for those individuals that couldn't do it. So I think the vast majority of the COVID relief went to this to help you guys out. So the society is very receptive to your needs and wants, and I think that's great.
Thanks, Brian. I'm going to go ahead and ask a couple of other questions that's on a broader Google document. And I think one of the things that come to mind is how specific should the background section be? Should we keep it broad in terms of the ecological studies that have been carried out, or should it be more focused on bird specific studies?
Broad is good because you're kind of setting it up in terms of the basic theory of the problem that you're investigating, but you don't want to be so broad that you're talking about all these generalities and then kind of get to the methods and, oh, by the way, well, I'm going to study this bird species. Keep in mind your audience in terms of the reviewers were ornithologists, and this is an ornithological grant, so you don't want to go too birdy, but you also don't want to go too heavy into the theory. The theory is super important, but don't wait too long to talk about how awesome birds are in this particular bird species you want to study.
Yeah, Jacob, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, thanks. That was really, really helpful and fun to see a lot of what's going on behind the scenes, but kind of similar to what Vijay just asked. I think a lot of us spend a bunch of time agonizing over wording and phrasing and structure, being paranoid about putting the cart before the horse in a given paragraph, sentence, clause, etc. So how much does all that agonizing really pay off in comparison to setting up your argument, how it plays out into the bigger picture of having a nice solid hypothesis and setup and logical flow of what you're talking about?
Well, I think the hypothesis, as you can imagine, is going to be very important, but if you present it in such a way that your sentence structure, all that stuff that you're talking about there is poor, and you don't communicate the idea clearly, then it's going to be problematic. I think that's when you talk to your advisor or another, maybe a student who's older student or even a postdoc in the lab that can give you some advice on that. It would help. But I think that idea, I've been doing it so long that I can usually read the first page and right away I've got a pretty good idea if this is going to be kind of novel and new and unique. So yeah, you need to come out right away and kind of make it clear what's happening here.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, it's helpful.
I think Brittany had a question, and Austin, one of you can go ahead. Yeah.
I'm Brittany. Mine was an accident.
Okay, I have a question. When showing that I've reviewed the literature, because I've read a lot, like probably more than like what's necessary. I don't want to bog down the reader with just a lot. What's kind of like a minimum or like a range of references in general, or a pattern that shows literature has been thoroughly reviewed without kind of like this is a kind of a necessary amount of references or things like that?
Yeah, when you cite something, you don't want like 5 or 6 or 7 references after it. Probably 3 maximum is fine. You want to make sure you're citing the key references in the fields. And we realize as reviewers, there's a finite amount of space to explain all this. And the literature, that we all do this when we put together a grant that has a, page limit. Okay, well, we need to probably cut out some references. That's the easiest way to do it. to get rid of things because you still want to explain some things. So can I cut out this reference? Yeah, maybe use a review paper here as opposed to citing three. So we understand, and I don't think it's is it possible to review the literature too much? I wish my students had that problem.
It's kind of like, man, I've read this before. I've read this again. I've been here for 3 hours, and it's kind of like the same thing over and over, which is good that you're seeing some of that. But it's like, I could cite 5 things for this one sentence, but is that even like appropriate? And it's like, probably not.
5, yeah, 5 is overkill. That was, I tell my students when I was a master's student, I think that's when well, without a doubt, it's when I learned the most about the subject that I still study. And I was in the library. We actually had to go to the library back then, and we had to have change for the copy machines because it was like a nickel each time. And I still have all those files that I've carried around with me through all my PhD, postdocs, you name it. And they're across the hall in my lab. And there's several of them that I don't have the complete literature cited because I ran out of change to copy them. But for me, that was the exciting part, reading all those papers and learning about this topic. I know I'm kind of going off here unrelated to the grants, but that's good. I'm glad to hear that.
I don't know how much you want us to jump in during this part, but I can say, I just pulled up my application. I had 14 references, and it ranged in a given statement from 1 to 3 references per statement. But I'll say that a lot of my references were really old. So I think that's one thing that makes grants that can help you be successful, is if you show you have a really good understanding of the background research, not just, oh, this paper was published last year and I read it, and so this is like what I'm going to cite because it's recent. But if you're like, a given field or a given topic will have sort of the foundational papers, and make sure you cite those. And those are way more important to cite than, something that was published last year. I think the more recent papers are helpful to cite when you're talking about why this field is important now, or sort of what the emerging questions are or the emerging methods. Then you cite the more recent papers, if that makes sense. Yeah, and then in total, I had 14 references for the entire proposal.
Okay, yeah, sorry, Anna. Part of that, my internet must have slowed down or something, but I caught most of it. I think that's a good point about citing kind of the classic papers in your field, but there is a catch-22 there as well, because you want to make sure that you cite some recent work as well to show, hey, this is cutting edge. Other people are thinking about these ideas. But yeah, I mean, there's one paper, or a couple papers in particular, that I still cite pretty much in every one of my papers, because those were the foundational papers and you need to cite those. Yes.
Steph has a question. Sorry,
Yeah,
Austin.
hi. So if we have a project where the total cost is more than what's typically funded by the grant, is it better to kind of maybe section off one component of the project that will fit the typical amount, or say sort of these are the other funding sources I'm applying to? What's kind of a good way to approach that? Or should you just focus on a smaller project that could be funded by the total amount?
Very rarely is $2,500, I think, going to cover an entire project, whatever it is. I mean, yeah, I can't think of too many. Maybe some field-based stuff. We expect that, so if you have the space, again, I guess it depends on space. And do you want to describe the entire project in a great amount of detail? You're probably not going to be able to do that. But I like a budget where these are the items listed, these are the things that I need, and then have columns. So AOS would be in one column, or alternatively, you could just say AOS here, and then whatever, Wilson, animal behavior, all the, different sorts of Chapman's, all the other grants out there that are available. Just make it clear where you're applying to for those other sources, but that's expected. Yeah. We try to do our best to give you a decent amount of money, but at the same time, we want to give and help out as many people as possible. So that's why it's not more than 2,500. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
Okay, we have a couple of more minutes before we go into breakout rooms. Does anyone else have any questions for Brian?
Ben posted a little statement in the comments. I want him to explain. I guess he is in the comments, actually. Never mind, I'll just read that.
I think Anna has a question.
Yes, hi. I was wondering how much weight has your CV in comparison to your project? Like, could it be that you have a great project, but because you have maybe some, well, maybe you don't have previous publications or something like that, that you couldn't get the grant? That's clear.
Yeah, that's a great question. So if it's an undergraduate student, we don't expect them to have much at all on their CV. A master's is going to have intermediate, but if we're looking at a PhD or even a postdoc, you're expecting some accomplishments from their previous degree. So if it's a PhD student, you already had a master's, it would be good to see that you go to meetings and give presentations, that you have a publication, at least one publication for your master's. Those are all good things to see, to show that, okay, yes, this person is a productive scientist. But I think that would, all that being said, it's still going to be a relatively minor item, because again, we realize you guys are still in the fledgling stages of your career.
Yeah, that was a great question to end on. And thank you so much, Brian, for that presentation. And thanks, Vijay, for facilitating that question session to Brian. So you might have noticed some other folks piping up. Those are our volunteers. We have 8 folks who received AOS Research Awards in 2021. And now we're going to break everyone into, we're going to have 4 breakout rooms. And there will be 2 of those volunteers who are generously giving their time this afternoon to share and answer more specific questions. So we kind of envision for these breakout rooms, this is your chance to ask them more nitty-gritty questions about the writing process, how they, went about deciding how to prioritize certain topics, like the bigger picture stuff we were just talking about. So I'm going to go ahead and open the breakout rooms. And Brian, thank you so much again. That was really valuable information for all of us. And if anything goes wrong, or you get lost, or you don't have a breakout room, Jenny will be in the main room, and she will help take care of you. So it looks like we just lost a few folks. So let me just move the breakout rooms a little bit so that, all right, I think it looks like we'll have still roughly equal numbers. Okay, so I'm going to open them, and you'll have a member of the Student Affairs Committee there to help facilitate the conversation and suggest some questions as well. And you'll have two volunteers. So enjoy breakout rooms. We will come back in 15 minutes and we'll close out. Make sure you know exactly where to find those AOS resources to keep your eyes peeled for the grant deadline in January, and everything like that. Okay, so I'm going to open those rooms.
A graduate one and a postdoc one. And I would generally say that, because like Brian talked about, there's so many applicants, they're looking for any reason to reject your grant. Basically, because it's so competitive, that's, they have to whittle it down. So, and there are always really good applications, more than they can fund. And so, yeah, they're looking for any reason to not fund your grant. And so, yeah, definitely following those formatting guidelines is always important. I really suggest, if you know somebody that has gotten an AOS grant, ask if you can see their proposal. I think it's always good to include as many details as you can. So you need to provide as much evidence as you can to convince them that your project is interesting, it's important, and it's most importantly feasible, because they don't want to fund something that's not doable with the given amount, or unless you have supporting funds that go along with it. And so I also recommend including a conceptual figure in your proposal. Let me see if I can find one. Always include a timeline too of when you're going to do things. And like you said, I think including data that you already have, preliminary data supporting your idea is always good. Drawing information from long-term studies, say so we have these samples from this long-term study, and I'm going to apply this unique analytical approach, or I'm going to analyze these samples in some way that's going to add to this project. and I'm going to take advantage of all the things that this project has already done too. So it's highly likely that it's going to be a successful project and something interesting as well. And so like, just as an example of a figure recently, I included like a little 3 or 4 panel figure where it was like a picture of me in the field, you know, and because it's like a remote field site, and then like a picture of me like collecting the samples specifically, a picture of the habitat. What else did I include? If you can include like diagrams of competing hypotheses, like this hypothesis would support like this relationship between these things, whereas this competitive alternative hypothesis would support this hypothesis. So you can use figures to make it, break up the text a little bit to make it interesting, or you can use figures to explain complicated topics or processes or patterns or whatever. I'll stop talking now, so somebody else can talk.
No, that was great. And Libby, yeah, go ahead if you had another thing you wanted to chime into that question.
Yeah, my big problem. So I think I've applied for this. Technically, I applied 4 times, but I wrote one 5 times because what he was saying earlier with the deadline is true. And I'm on the West Coast, and I said, oh, it's due at noon. I'll show up at 9 and I'll submit it. And I missed the deadline. I had it all ready and I crawled under my desk and cried. So follow the deadlines. And then also something Stephanie asked earlier about partitioning your budget. I applied in 2018 and it was, you know, a big project. So I was applying for money in lots of places, and I luckily was able to fund it, like this one part of my project, my field data collection. And then, but I had asked for that same money from the AOS. So then when the AOS awarded me the money, I said, can I use this for the sequencing part of the project instead? And they said, well, no, that's not what you asked for. So I would say be really thoughtful about the way you write your budgets for multiple grant applications, so that you're not asking, like if you can, you know, ask for money in sort of like a fluid way, or maybe a vaguer way, not specifically say like, I want to spend this money on net polls. Well, I'd already bought the net polls, so I wasn't able to use the money at all. So I would suggest, yeah, being mindful of ways that you can bend the money into different streams for the same project is good if you get double funded.
Yeah, that's a good point. And one of the questions that our Student Affairs Committee wondered about ahead of time was, if you do have some aspects of your project funded and you're trying to prioritize this smaller grant amount for a really concrete part of your project, how do you paint that picture to AOS in a convincing way that that part of the project you're asking them for this smaller amount is still critical to the success of the project? And you, just because you have another part funded doesn't mean you can complete the project without AOS support.
Something I did along those lines was, so I was looking for money for genomic sequencing this last time around. And I said, you know, I have the money for like 3x of sequencing, or like low coverage sequencing, but I'm going to be able to recover a lot more variance if I have this extra money for one more flow cell. So by demonstrating that it'll improve what you already have, that might help. I think that was a successful argument. If you can do like a power analysis or something and say like, this will improve my ability to answer my question by this, you know, %, that might be useful.
Yeah, I would just say like clearly explain the goals of the other project, and then also even more clearly explain how your project is different from that other project, different from the goals of that other project. And I think it's good. You know, you have to be very strategic, you know, in terms of your writing and you know, concisely explaining these things. But you know, you can also say how your, you know, ideas you know, after you distinguish them, might even add to the goals of the other project more broadly.
Yeah, that's a good point to make those connections clear. What other questions do folks have for Ben and Libby? We have a few other ideas that our committee came up with, and I can throw some of those out too, but. One kind of broad one is, you know, how far in advance do you recommend starting? I think that sometimes it can be an incorrect notion that, oh, a couple page proposal, it's a short one, but sometimes it's a lot harder to write something that's that concise. So what would be your advice? You know, if the deadline's at the end of January, what was your process like for that timeline?
I would say it's never too soon, you know, to start. But, you know, doesn't mean you shouldn't try if it's a week away. Like, you know, like just try to get something out there. Worst case scenario, you obviously want to put the best product out there that you can, but like, I wouldn't let a time, you know, just, it also depends on how you work too, you know, what your working style is. But, you know, my first application, I don't know if I think I was like a few weeks between when I started and when I finished writing. But along those lines, I also want to suggest that when you're writing these grants, recycle material, you know, like, so if you're applying to a few different places, like you can reuse the text, you know, and so don't be, you know, that's something, I think it's a good strategy to always recycle text when you can.
I agree with the recycling wholeheartedly, especially because at least in evolutionary biology, you know, the Rosemary Grant Award is due in September, and then the systematic biologist is due December. So it's like I've kind of already got one by the time the AOS grants roll around. But for me, I like to give my PI 2 weeks to look at it, and I like to give myself 2 weeks to revise based on my PI's comments, and, you know, if he wants to take another look. So I like to be done, you know, at least have a first draft that I can send off a month in advance or 4 weeks in advance. And then that, you know, it's not going to take him 2 weeks. It's not going to take me 2 weeks. That gives me plenty of wiggle room.
Yeah, this is like something that you're going to have to go back and forth on with somebody. I definitely agree with Libby in that you want to be respectful of other people's times. And then when you're reaching out to people, you know, don't assume that it's their, you don't want to come off as entitled, like you're entitled to their feedback, you know, like be very respectful and be like, you know, if you have the time, you know, like don't assume they're obligated to help you, basically, because that can be super frustrating from their perspective. You know, here's this person who maybe, I mean, if they're your advisor, sure, you are probably entitled to their time and whatnot. But in other cases, you know, just don't come off as like demanding or, you know, something like that where you know, you're asking without, or demanding basically without asking.
On that note, how many, oh, sorry, did I just cut someone off?
I just have a question, but it's unrelated. So if you're going to talk more about what they're talking about, then.
Well, just a real quick follow-up on that. You know, it's another thing with a short proposal is deciding how many cooks you want to invite into the kitchen, but how many folks did you ask for feedback from? And, you know, do you try to strategize, okay, I'll have someone who I work with in the field, someone who can help revise, you know, to see if my analysis methods were written clearly. Do either of you have any tips on that?
For my master's, there was a bunch of us who, you know, were in a cohort. So in our lab, we just passed them around each other. By the time I'm in my, you know, 4th year of my PhD, it's kind of just me and my PI. I sort of have a better handle on what I'm doing. So might help with your stage.
Yeah, I agree with Libby. Like, you know, where you at in your state, you know, in your writing, how good of a writer you are, how experienced you are. Like the more eyes in the beginning, especially like when you're just like getting started with this, like the more eyes you can get on your application, the better. But doesn't mean, and like I would say, like find people that you can trust to give you like honest feedback, because that's like some people, they don't want to, you know, hurt your feelings, be like, oh, this isn't a good idea. Like find someone who's going to tell you straight up, like this is what you need to do, you know, or like this, you might consider something else. So, and it doesn't necessarily have to be your advisor. And I wouldn't, disregard like other graduate students or postdocs. Like those would be great people to give you feedback, particularly because they're often not as busy as your advisor potentially.
Austin, did you have a question earlier?
Yeah, just what was the hardest part for you guys? What did you find most difficult?
Libby, go, Libby, go.
For me, it was synthesizing the methods, like the stats I was going to use, and coming across like I knew what I was like prepared for what I was going to do, but sort of not bogging them down in details. That was tough for me.
I would say, like the toughest part, I would say just about grant writing in general is like finding the appropriate call for your grant. Like you could write a stellar grant application, but it's just not tailored to that grant funding opportunity. So I think, it's that can be a difficult part, like finding a grant call that fits your goals and is good for that idea or question. Like, so I think that's part of the tricky part.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ben and Libby. We have 2 seconds. So all right. All right, I think everyone has filtered back in. I hope those breakout rooms were helpful. Let's see, we wanted to just share in the chat quickly the link to make sure everyone knows where to find the AOS Research Awards. So I'm going to post that here. Just give me 1 second. Okay, so the link that I just posted, that's where you can see that list of the different types of grants that Brian shared that screenshot of in his presentation. So you can get a sense, you don't need to name which one you're applying for, but you can get a sense of what the different possibilities are that might fit your project well. And it still has the 2021 deadline on it, which was postponed due to COVID. It was in early February. I think what Brian said was that it'll be in late January this coming round. So you can keep your eyes on this webpage to see when they post that deadline. And let's see, does anyone else on the Student Affairs Committee have any other announcements before we wrap up?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Maina. Yeah, I mean, I think this whole event was really, really helpful. Thanks so much for putting it together. If you liked this event and are interested in others and have positive feedback or negative feedback, next week, on a week from right now, on Thursday the 18th at 3 p.m. So I guess an hour earlier than this meeting, there's going to be a town hall. And so if you want to sign up for that, I'll put the link for it to sign up for it in the chat, and it would be great to see you there.
Yeah, and that'll be a great chance to weigh in on anything you want to voice as a student member of the AOS, but as the monthly series subcommittee of the Student Affairs Committee, we're all interested in hearing what would be most useful to you. So you can always feel free to email us, reach out to us, or speak up in that town hall with ideas for what other types of skill sharing events like this would be most useful to you all.
I just wanted to throw out one last thing, which is that when I was applying for this grant and a lot of other grants too, it's really helpful to reach out to past graduate students that may be in your lab or people or meet at conferences and ask to read their successful proposals, because that can help hugely. So don't be shy. I did it. I think it's pretty common for grad students to just cold email, people you meet at conferences and be like, hey, I heard you got this grant. Can I see, would you mind sharing it with me? So I'd recommend doing that too.
Thanks, Anna. All right, Austin has his hand raised, and I think, help us round out our last 2 minutes here. Austin, go for it.
It's really helpful that what my lab does. We have a binder of our proposals that everybody has that opens it up to everyone to come look. It says rejected on it or accepted, and these different, dichotomies of what the proposal is about. But if your lab doesn't do it, that's been really helpful for me as a first-year master's to read through those.
Yeah, that's a great tip if you can get that help from your lab mates. Anyone else have any closing thoughts or questions for any of our volunteers or for the Student Affairs Committee? Yeah, Libby, go for it.
I just had a link that I thought I could share. It's kind of old now. It's from the, I don't know if people know about this, the Ornithology Exchange has like a huge page. It's got 274 ornithology grants listed on it. Some of them are really specific. You know, you have to be studying water birds in Colorado. Some of them are really broad, and you know, the AOS ones are on here. And it's definitely a time commitment to search through those, but I've just shared that link on here. It was worth it for me. I found a lot of cool things that I wouldn't have applied for otherwise.
Thanks so much, Libby. Yeah, that's really helpful because, of course, AOS is by no means the only society that's offering research grants to students like us. So definitely tune into that list for some other ideas of grants where you might be able to, you know, adapt some of your same writing material to apply for several of these small research awards. And thanks so much to the volunteers that generously shared their emails in the chat, so offering to send their successful proposal. So feel free to reach out to those volunteers. And yeah, it's 5 o'clock. So thank you all so much for tuning in. We are really grateful you all make these monthly series events valuable. And so we appreciate you coming and sharing your questions and your perspectives. So I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Maina.